Regulation of nursing practice. Nurse Practice Act. A Nurse Practice Act is a series of statutes that have been enacted by each state legislature to regulate the practice of nursing in that state. Nurse Practice Acts set educational requirements for the nurse, distinguish between nursing practice and medical practice, and define the scope of nursing practice. Additional issues covered by Nurse Practice Acts include licensure requirements for protection of the public, grounds for disciplinary action, rights of the nurse licensee if a disciplinary action is taken, and related topics. All nurses are responsible for knowing the provisions of the Act of the state or province in which they work. Standards of care. Standards of care are guidelines that identify what the client can expect to receive in terms of nursing care. The guidelines determine whether nurses have performed duties in an appropriate manner. If a nurse does not perform duties within accepted standards of care, the nurse places himself or herself in jeopardy of legal action. If a nurse is named as a defendant in a malpractice lawsuit, and proceedings show that the nurse followed neither the accepted standards of care outlined by the state or province Nurse Practice Act, nor the policies of the employing institution, the nurse's legal liability is clear. He or she is liable. Employee guidelines. Respondent superior. The employer is held liable for any negligent acts of an employee if the alleged negligent act occurred during the employment relationship and was within the scope of the employee's responsibilities. Contracts. Nurses are responsible for carrying out the terms of a contractual agreement with the employing agency and the client. The nurse-employee relationship is governed by established employee handbooks and client care policies and procedures that create obligations, rights, and duties between those parties. Institutional policies. Written policies and procedures of the employing institution detail how nurses are to perform their duties. Policies and procedures are usually specific and describe the expected behavior on the part of the nurse. Although policies are not laws, courts generally rule against nurses who violate policies. If the nurse practices nursing according to client care policies and procedures established by the employer, functions within the job responsibility, and provides care consistently in a non-negligent manner, the nurse minimizes the potential for liability. Reminder: the nurse must follow the guidelines identified in the Nurse Practice Act and agency policies and procedures when delivering client care. Hospital staffing. Charges of abandonment may be made against nurses who walk out when staffing is inadequate. Nurses in short staffing situations are obligated to make a report to the nursing administration. Floating. Floating is an acceptable, legal practice used by healthcare facilities to alleviate understaffing and overstaffing. Legally, a nurse cannot refuse to float, unless a union contract guarantees that nurses can work only in a specified area, or the nurse can prove lack of knowledge for the performance of assigned tasks. Nurses in a floating situation must not assume responsibility beyond their level of experience or qualification. Nurses who float should inform the supervisor of any lack of experience in caring for the type of clients on the new nursing unit. The nurse should request and be given orientation to the new unit. Disciplinary action. Boards of nursing may deny, revoke, or suspend any license to practice as a registered nurse, according to their statutory authority. Some causes for disciplinary action are as follows. Unprofessional conduct. Conduct that could affect the health and welfare of the public adversely. Breach of client confidentiality. Failure to use sufficient knowledge, skills, or nursing judgment. Physically or verbally abusing a client. Assuming duties without sufficient preparation. Knowingly delegating to unlicensed personnel nursing care that places the client at risk for injury. Failure to maintain an accurate record for each client. Falsifying a client's record. Leaving a nursing assignment without properly notifying appropriate personnel.